Good evening, everybody. A very warm welcome to Woking United Reformed Church for this evening of Hustings. This event is being hosted on behalf of Churches Together in Woking. We have a motto here in this church which says, whoever you are and wherever you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. And I hope you feel the warmth of that welcome tonight as we come together as a community for our community. Couple of just very practical things. I do apologise about the church's appearance. As you can see, we're having some of our roof replaced. Some of the areas of the church are out of bounds, but if you need to use the facilities at any point, you can go out of the back door where you came in, down the room here, and they're up the steps on my left. There is some scaffolding there, so do take care. I'm going to begin this evening with a prayer. I realise that you may not all be praying people, and that's okay, but perhaps we can all just pause in this moment and be grateful for the freedom that we have to come together in this country for an event like this. So let us pray. Loving God, we thank you for this space, this place, this time, and this gathering this evening. We pray for fruitful discussions, which will be for the well-being of our community. We thank you for the privilege that each of us has to cast our votes and to live in freedom. We pray that you will bless all that is shared here in this place tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. I'd now like to introduce my husband. This is Justin, and he will be our moderator for the evening.
Good evening. It's exciting to be here and great to see so many people have turned out. And there's, of course, people watching online as well via Facebook and YouTube. Just to explain a little bit about the format of this evening, each candidate will first of all give a 3-minute opening presentation. And at the end of the evening, there'll be an opportunity for 2 minutes each with their closing thoughts as well. But most of the evening will be the Q&A. Some of you will have already submitted questions ahead of time. Some of you may have written down your questions on the cards that were available at the entrance. That's now finished, and those will be brought to me shortly so that I can choose from those. But there is also, throughout the whole of the event, the Slido option. If you want to scan the QR code or go to the website slido.com and put in Woking Hustings, you'll be able to ask your question there. So if I've got my phone out, it's not because I'm playing Candy Crush, it's because I'm looking through the questions and we will try to get to as many of them as possible. Obviously, we won't be able to ask all the questions that have been submitted tonight. We've had a large number of questions emailed in advance. We'll get to as many as possible. I've asked the candidates to give concise answers as far as possible. Some that are similar in nature that have already been sent in, we've put together in sort of thematically so that we can ask those. We have 6 candidates here. We won't be seeking responses from all of them on every question. Some questions, no doubt, will be targeted to specific candidates, but I'll try to make sure that everyone gets an opportunity to speak. We'll be discussing issues that matter to all of us in our local community. There will be disagreement, but I do ask you as an audience to be respectful of the candidates, and of course, I'm sure the candidates will do the same for each other. Let me first very briefly introduce the candidates. From left to right, and this order was selected randomly by drawing lots. But on the left is, of course, Jonathan Lord, who is with the Conservatives. Richard Barker is next to him. Richard is from Reform UK. Tim Reid is there next to Richard, and Tim Reid is from the Heritage Party. Natalie Anderson is from the Green Party. Will Forster is from the Liberal Democrats, and Essie, I'm going to get this wrong, Essie, I'm so sorry, O'Reilly, I believe, is from the Labour Party. Can we give a round of applause to all of our candidates? So I'm going to take a seat, and if you would like to step up first of all, Jonathan, and take to the podium.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Justin and Lucy and the United Reformed Church for hosting this hustings. That's on behalf of all us candidates. It has been the privilege of my life to serve the residents of Woking and our villages in Parliament since 2010. I live here, I've raised a family here, and I've got to know so many wonderful people working in our schools, our public services, our businesses, and our charities. Not least, so many fantastic volunteers and charity workers, many of whose sense of mission and selfless help is grounded in their faith, strengthened by their involvement in Christian churches like this one throughout our borough, or indeed in our mosques and in our other faith communities. Over those years, I have done my best to help all of those individuals or families who have come to me for advice and support on so many issues and personal crises. Indeed, a Home Office official once joked with me that they should set up an MP hotline just for me and my assistant. Such was the volume of visa and immigration issues that we were pursuing with them. And I've helped to deliver the terrific Bedser Hub at our community hospital, which does so much to support our frail elderly. And most recently, I helped to secure, then by personal intervention with the Health Secretary, managed to double the funding for our new state-of-the-art diagnostic centre at the community hospital that is currently in the process of completion. And I've been involved in so many local campaigns, several major anti-flooding schemes delivered, and 70 other flooding and drainage issues solved. A new, less noisy surface coming for the M25 between Byfleet and West Byfleet, helping to save Citizens Advice Woking, and securing a new direct bus route from Woking to Ashford and St Peter's hospitals. Now, in 2010, as you all know, the coalition government, the Conservative Lib Dem coalition government, inherited a financial mess from the global crash, but also from Labour. For every £4 being spent by the government, only £3 were coming in taxes. And with the help of the Lib Dems in government, we put the nation's finances back in order. And thank goodness we did. We have since had COVID, the war in Ukraine, and we had to spend, quite rightly, £400 billion to help individuals and families and businesses through that crisis and through the energy crisis. But despite that massive dent in our nation's finances, our balance sheet, despite the massive economic dislocations caused by COVID and the Ukraine war, we are now back on track. The UK economy is growing faster than Germany, France, Italy, and Spain. Inflation has fallen to 2.3%, lower than the US and most of Europe. 4 million more jobs have been created since 2010. The best primary school-age readers in the whole of the Western world are here, in England, not in Scotland or in Wales, that haven't had the education reforms that came through in England. Thank you very much indeed.
Richard is going to step forward on behalf of Reform UK. Robert, I wonder if you could move to a seat just in front of the candidates, just so that they've got their reminder right in front of them. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you to our hosts this evening. So I'm Richard Barker, Reform UK. So my views and values, they used to align with the Conservative Party. And I was delighted when Boris Johnson won the 2019 election. And frankly, though, I am still shocked at what happened and what unfolded over the following years, which seemed to be propelled by the pandemic. So by 2021, I realized I was no longer represented in British politics. We've witnessed a rapidly expanding state, hungry for control, restricting our freedoms, even applying coercion to achieve its goals. It appears our needs are now secondary to the agendas of unelected global institutions. Big state, highest taxes for 70 years, low growth, uncontrolled immigration, and authoritarian woke agenda. This is a socialist government, and we know all the established parties will give more of the same. If you want change, You must be the change. So I step forward to stand for Reform UK, the party truly defending British values, supporting British business and believing in our sovereignty. I live just outside the constituency in Surrey Heath, where the party already had a candidate, so I requested to represent Woking, the closest town with a wide-ranging business community, where I believe my business experience can have a major impact. And with the current state of Woking's finances, major impact is needed. To protect Woking's prized assets, from Paul in the Park to the football club, we must work together. Building high-performance teams has always been my passion, and I commit that as your MP, I would be a focal point around which others could coalesce. The range of small and medium-sized businesses, or SMEs, across Woking is a sounding board for the country. As your MP, I would seek business leaders' views to help impact and deliver supportive legislation. SMEs are the backbone of Britain's economy, and Reform UK is committed to removing bureaucracy and reducing taxation to enable reinvestment for growth. For only through growth will we escape this legacy of debt to fund the services we need. Many of Woking's issues are due to a failure of national policy, causing local challenges. As a geoscientist with a 30-year career in the oil and gas industry, I would utilize my expertise to champion an effective and affordable energy strategy, currently a major issue for the nation. Finally, I would say my vision for Woking is of a prosperous, thriving commuter town with a blend of successful local, national, and international businesses. An enjoyable place to live, raise a family, or to retire, in a cohesive community offering desirable services and amenities, surrounded by the beautiful Surrey countryside. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And Tim Reid of the Heritage Party.
Good evening. Okay, I can hear myself echoed now, that's good. Thank you again for organising the Hustings. It's a great thing in this country that we can sit and have a civil disagreement about things. We may take very different views, but we have the right to question each other and to have our views heard, and it's a wonderful thing. I used to be in the audience. Now, if you listen too carefully, you might find yourself up here. Let me introduce myself. I'm a chemical engineer who's worked for a number of years. I've worked in the chemical industry, I've worked drilling oil wells, I've worked in gas plants, I've worked in engineering, I'm involved in some of the energy transition engineering projects, software and research. My wife and I have lived in Woking for 25 years. We've raised our family here. Both children were born in St. Peter's. I've also been a governor of St. John's Primary School and a local church warden. So why the Heritage Party? When David Curtin formed the Heritage Party, I read the manifesto online, and I thought if he's willing to stand up for those principles, he deserves some support. So I joined. And I'm going to make 3 points from the Heritage Party to you, and 1 personal point about Woking, in the hope of showing you a little bit about what's different about the Heritage Party. Firstly, we are the only party that I'm aware of that wants to stop the war in the Ukraine. Okay? We do not support the war. Was created by acts from both sides, and I'm horrified by the lack of effort to stop this war going on. Thousands of people are being lost every single day. They are real people, they have real value. I'm shocked at my society that there is no effort to stop that happening. Secondly, we stood against lockdowns, and especially the coercion for what was at the time called vaccinations. Some of them are no longer allowed to be called vaccinations, they're called treatments. Okay? It was a freedom issue, but a lot of political pressure was brought to bear, even when it became clear that these vaccinations would not stop the virus spreading, and also they were given to people who were at an age where it was of no benefit to them. I'm going to run out, aren't I? Thirdly, we're very much opposed to net zero. I work in this industry. It's a disaster. Honestly, Energy prices go up. There's no point complaining about the cost of living, the cost of food, all these other things if you bump the energy prices up and cut your own throat, which is what net zero is. My final point is I want the central government to adopt the outstanding debt to Woking. Okay? That money was lent by a lax government that should not have lent the money to a council that was naive, and it was voted through by the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives. That debt in any other organisation would already have been cancelled because we'd have gone properly bankrupt. And it's wrong that people in Woking are going to pay the price for that over a long time to come. I know I've run out of my time, and hopefully not my welcome. I hope you will look into what the Heritage Party stands for, and if you agree, I hope you'll give me your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Natalie Anderson, the Green Party.
Hello, and thank you everybody for coming. So why am I here today? I'm the victim of a serious injustice that has not yet been acknowledged by the British government, even though in 2019, 120 MPs called for an inquiry into the horrific outcomes of the so-called family courts. We saw an instance of this in Woking with the murder of a little girl named Sarah Sharif last year. And it is happening to thousands of children across the country and has been happening for years. Yesterday, in the Irish Parliament, there was a petition presented by the Alliance of Birth Mothers talking about the unlawful removal of children from their mothers and sometimes fathers and placement in settings where they're vulnerable to the most horrific abuse. The same things are happening in the UK. I have heard from parents in Woking who have been driven to feel suicidal. Very recently, I supported a mother from this town who was desperate as she was being harassed by a social worker. She was pregnant and terrified they would take her child. I cannot imagine a pregnant woman having to go through this. I sat with her in a child protection conference. There must have been 10 professionals in the room, which I think, and the meeting took, I think, 2 hours. And to their credit, at the end, every single one of them said there was no reason to start a child protection case against this mother, except one, the social worker who kept on insisting that she had reached the threshold for child protection. The reason was spurious. I'm told by a friend who is an advocate that this mother has probably not seen the last of this social worker. He will try to find something against her again and again and again. The cruel separation of mothers and children in the UK has happened, and abroad has happened many times over history. One of the causes seems to be financial at the moment. Taking a child currently attracts a cash payout to the local authority. This woman knows 4 other women here in Woking who it is happening to, but they're too frightened to come forward. The pumped-up costs of care home are known to the Competition and Care Homes, are known to the Competition and Markets Authority, and these profits are sometimes taken out of the UK tax-free through offshore companies. Another instance of how our country is being robbed. George Monbiot wrote about this in The Guardian a couple of weeks ago. The value of taking a child is about £100,000. This has turned children into commodities. This has happened to my children, and this is why I started to do human rights work, and this is why I'm standing for the Green Party, because it is the only party that will stop the privatization of everything that we hold sacred, including, I hope, our children. So I'm here to hold the other parties to account and make sure that we stop this. It is an outrage. Thank you for listening.
And Will Forster from the Liberal Democrats.
Good evening, all. So, as Justin said, I'm Will Forster, I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate. And I'm running to be Woking's MP because I feel like everything is broken. Nothing's working the way it should. And we're headed in the wrong direction. On the cost of living, I know families that are struggling to heat their homes, buy the food that they used to. I know other people that are struggling to pay their rent and mortgages because of Liz Truss's disastrous budget almost 2 years ago that shot up interest rates. Our most cherished public service, the NHS, has been trashed by the Conservatives. We've got 1.7 million people waiting for operations. NHS workers that love their job so much have been driven to strike by this government. Our local council went effectively bankrupt last year with more debts than any other local authority in the country. Our rivers are full of raw sewage, more than ever before, a record. None of that is acceptable. And this election is your chance to change those things and tackle those issues. If the Conservatives lose Woking at the general election, they're out of government. And I desperately think we need a new government. And in Woking, it's the Liberal Democrats that can remove the Conservatives here. As well as changing the government, you can elect a local, hard-working MP who will fight your corner in Parliament. I am that candidate. I was born and raised in Woking. I care about my area. I've been a local councillor for years. I'm a former mayor of this borough. And I recently got elected as deputy leader of Woking Borough Council when the Lib Dems took over running that authority. And we got elected because the residents were fed up of what the Conservatives have done to our town. They have effectively bankrupted it. And we've been elected to clear up that mess. And I've played a leading role in doing that. As your MP, if I'm elected, I will fight for a government support that our town desperately needs. But I also want to make sure this doesn't happen to other towns. We need fairer funding for councils. And that is something that I, as your MP, will put front and centre as my term. But I'll go beyond that. I want to fight and champion for our NHS. I've already pushed to have a Shearwater health centre so our most deprived community can get the improved access to healthcare that they need. We need more GPs, and mental health services should no longer be forgotten. The cost of living crisis is a huge issue, and I will champion those people by making sure we have a windfall tax on oil and gas companies. And I will vote to stop sewage going in our rivers. That's the offer from me to the people of Woking, a fair deal with the Lib Dems. I will fight your corner in Parliament, and I will not take you for granted.
And finally, for Labour, Ese Orerani.
Thank you, and it's great to be here. Excuse me. Politics is sometimes called the art of the possible. You, the voters, give us, the politicians, your trust, and we deliver the best type of government we know how to deliver. That's a bargain that underpins our democracy, but that bargain has gone badly wrong here in Woking. Woking Labour has been out canvassing for months, and in that time, not a single person has told me that they feel better off now than they were 14 years ago when the Conservatives took government and Mr. Lord became your MP. Not a single person has said that they feel the council that Mr. Foster has been a member of this entire time is better placed now to support their needs than it was then. In fact, we hear the opposite. People feel poorer. Their bills are going up, including council tax. It's impossible to get a GP appointment or a dental appointment. There's a lack of affordable housing, and the council is effectively bankrupt. That's not governance. That's gross negligence. I'm a financial journalist by background, so I know numbers. And I am standing because I know that Woking residents deserve better than you've been getting from your current elected officials. Labour has a fully costed manifesto that is offering real change. As part of our first steps, we are determined to deliver economic stability, which means boosting growth by supporting our local businesses here in Woking. We are going to get Woking building by delivering the affordable houses that renters and buyers need. We're going to cut NHS waiting times so that you can actually get an appointment at the community health centre or wherever it is you need to be. And we're going to reform local government financing so that the kinds of get-rich-quick schemes we've seen here in Woking can never happen again. But with a Labour government, we need a Labour MP here in Woking who can represent this town at the heart of Westminster, who can knock on Keir Starmer's door as our next Prime Minister and say, this is what Woking needs. We don't need an opposition MP sitting on the backbenches protesting from the sidelines. Trust is so hard to build and so easy to break. The Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats have broken the trust of Woking residents, but Labour is asking for a chance to serve you. Thank you.
Well, thank you to all the candidates for those opening statements and why you have put yourself forward to be the elected representative for Woking. This first question came in on email. In fact, it represents a number of questions that came in on email ahead of the event. And I'm going to enable everyone to respond to this. So we will start in the order that we just heard, and starting with Jonathan. But again, this is a few different people asked similar sorts of questions, which we've put together in this way. Many people have asked about poverty in our community, including the need for food banks, noting that 30% of children in Shearwater are living in poverty. The need for social housing, especially with special adaptations for those with disabilities, the list goes on. What action will you take, or would you take, to address these needs? I'll start with you, Jonathan.
Sure. Well, I was at the Shearwater Health Centre with the Secretary of State for Health just last week. It's a council-owned building, and it desperately needs some refurbishment and expanding into a part of the building that isn't used. But at the very least, it needs all the litter and broken fences cleaned up. And that is a council-owned property, and they should be doing that. Shearwater has a fantastic community. The new social housing that has been built there is absolutely fantastic, really top-notch. But going forward, in order to help those in poverty, we need the real long-term solutions. So I mentioned education in my opening remarks. And education is the way out of poverty, because that's the way to stable families, which is also important, and to good jobs. And we need those welfare reforms to encourage and help people from welfare into work. So there's a lot of work to do in Shearwater, and the council has to play its part. And the Labour candidate was absolutely right in saying that the council, which produced that fantastic new Eastwood Leisure Centre and swimming pool for the community of Shearwater and the wider community, but has run out of money. But the Liberal Democrat candidate in this election, he talks about a Conservative disaster, and yes, indeed, there were Conservative councillors involved, but it was done on an overtly cross-party basis. It would not have happened without Lib Dem support. So I think it's disingenuous of the Liberal candidate to talk about that whilst not admitting that he himself voted for almost all of those loans, including in the town centre.
We'll have a chance to hear from him in a moment. Richard.
Yeah, so I suppose my first question would be, how did we get into this state? Because obviously we're here and there's a trajectory to get here. I think understanding that will then help us to first stop a worsening problem and then look at how, going forward, we can change it. Now, we're talking about people in a community. We need to speak, my view is we need to find out a bit more information about what it is that makes them feel or that is creating a situation where there is such a high percentage of child poverty. What are the individual issues with each family that has put them in a situation where they feel they can't break out of that trap? Is this a poverty trap where they feel, is it because work doesn't pay, for example? Is it the tax rates are too high, so they're better off, they feel that they might as well stay on benefits? I don't know. These are just questions that I'm putting out there. Is there a skills gap? I mean, one of the things that absolutely we have to look at is improving people's skills such that they can invest their way out of poverty. And if there's one priority we should have, it's investing in skills, because, of course, it always pays for itself quite quickly as well. Now, the elephant in the room, I think, when it comes to housing itself, and it's surprising how often it's not mentioned, Of course, again, it comes back to this supply and demand issue with social housing. And we have had huge net immigration in the last 3 years. I think it's almost 2 million people. That's like almost 2 cities the size of Birmingham within 3 years. And of course, that huge demand, people are looking for houses, whether it be to purchase or to rent or social housing. So to keep pace with that kind of number is very, very difficult. So Reform UK's policy is to have net zero immigration, so that's balancing the numbers coming in and numbers coming out, going out, so that the country can pause and digest the numbers that we have so far, and help in the longer term, because this is a longer term issue. We can't fix this overnight. Help the country rebalance.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to Tim.
Thank you. As an engineer, we have 2 types of approaches to these problems. First thing you do is you fix the symptom of what's going wrong. We have to make sure that existing systems are able to supply the assistance that's needed, that social work and universal benefits, etc., are available and can be understood. Because some of the time things could be available and there could be nobody who knows what door to push on or how to campaign for something. But that's the problem that you're in right now. The second point you come to is how do you avoid this problem? And when you have a percentage on poverty and you perhaps define it in the financial thing, that is a way of measuring something. Somebody may actually be very rich who's got a very well-organised family on very little money. Somebody may be have a lot of money and actually be quite destitute. Okay, it's easier to be destitute when you're rich than it is to be destitute when you're poor. But we need, as Richard was saying, to look at the underlying causes. And I think that's the key thing. One of the things perhaps the Heritage Party would push a bit more strongly is we very strong supporters of the family. Okay, we would again come back to encouraging marriage. This is the best thing you can do for children, is to have them brought up in a married home. It's not possible for everyone. My parents are divorced, so I'm not making a sort of judgment here, but I'm telling you that on average, the best thing that can happen for children's outcomes is to live in a married home, and the government should attempt to encourage marriage.
Thank you very much. Natalie.
Well, I think you've already heard from me that I care deeply about children and families, and another thing that worries me very much is the enormous ballooning wealth inequality that we have right now. So I'm very, very happy about the Green proposal, which has been endorsed by financial institutions as being a very sensible one, and that is to tax the ultra-wealthy. So that's a proposal to tax people with an income of over £10 million, an additional 1%, which is a very small amount. This would secure a really good stream of revenue for public services. A friend of mine rang me, actually, who used to be a millionaire before, actually had a similar problem as I have with the justice system, and said, you know what, 1% is not very much. These people have got loads of money. Why don't you ask them for 2%? It really might hardly dent it. They wouldn't notice, he said. So apart from that, again, we come to private ownership. Housing, the housing crisis is being driven by investment into real estate. So people are fleeing from investing into currencies and other things which are risky in the current environment and investing into British property. So we have got an awful lot of empty homes. So we need government which is going to get to grips with that, find ways to bring housing units that we already have into use, because it's absolutely outrageous that there are people who are crying out for housing and who are homeless while there are empty units standing which could be used. Equally with the food system, I don't know how many of you know that we're seeing a market consolidation of the food supply globally. So there are very, very large multinational companies who own most of the food supply system. And that is the reason why food prices have been rising. It's not so much about the war in Ukraine, it's not so much about COVID, it is about these companies inflating their profits. Same with landlords. They will buy up large buildings or build them, rent them out, and then charge enormously high service charges. I know somebody whose partner works in a company like that and said these service charges are the biggest scam ever. So the Green Party is proposing a raft of policies around regulating the rental market, including caps on rent, an end to no-fault evictions, and would invest in social housing and ending the right to buy, because we are losing our stock of social housing. That's why people are desperate.
Thank you very much. Pass it on to Will.
Thank you, Justin. So this question's in two parts, poverty and then local government. I've got to start with poverty. It's an issue that's really important to my heart. So I was raised by a single mum on benefits in the Lakeview, Southwood area of Woking. I know what it's like to go to the shops with enough coins to buy what you need to buy and putting stuff back. I feel that so many people in power don't understand the challenges I face as a child, or many of you face now. And that's one of the things we need to change in this election. The Liberal Democrats do want to end right to buy that has robbed our social housing stock. We do want to end no-fault evictions, because I am fed up as a councillor, people coming to me in tears with their landlord having evicted them because they want the house back. That's not acceptable and needs to change. But above all, we need to introduce free school meals for primary school children. It is unacceptable that children go to school hungry and their parents cannot feed them. We need to make sure they have that good start in life. But we then have local government as well. Now, local government funding has been cut by 25% since 2016. Jonathan voted for that. And the Conservatives encourage councils like Woking to go and borrow. And Woking did it in huge style. Despite what Jonathan says, I didn't vote for the Victoria Arch scheme, the Shield Regeneration scheme, lending £250 million to Golddev for a football club development, or lending money to the Greenfield private school. Didn't vote for any of that. Don't take my word for it. Every election since Woking has gone bankrupt, voters have elected the Lib Dems, and they have rejected every single Conservative candidate. Voters clearly think that the Conservatives were responsible and the Lib Dems the ones to clear up the mess, and they're right. With your support, I can take that fight to Parliament and properly solve our local issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Will. And Essie.
Thank you. Poverty levels, homelessness, housing instability, all of these things are really, really unsettling. I grew up in a working class family, in a working class neighbourhood, so I know what that feels like, where you're kind of concerned about what the future is going to be, bills coming through the door. What we're seeing in Woking is that people are in temporary accommodation. They're at the highest levels ever. There's hidden homelessness, or we're seeing people couch surfing, that sort of thing. It's not enough for us to kind of put out platitudes. We need to be able to change things. And it is Mr. Foster, as the councillor, whose portfolio includes Shearwater, voted to reduce by 40 units the affordable homes in that regeneration project, which would have helped 40 families to have somewhere affordable to live, you know, keeping them out of temporary accommodation, off the streets, whatever the situation was. We need affordable housing. He voted against that. So what Labour is saying that we're going to do in that situation, we're going to build 1.5 million new good homes over the course of the next Parliament. 40% of those will be affordable homes, so that renters, first-time buyers, other buyers, that they can have the access to the housing that they need. We're going to end no-fault evictions because that really prejudices particularly renters. We want to strengthen renters' rights and their feeling that they can fight back against unjust landlords. That's really important. We're also going to end moving away from the housing aspect of poverty. It's people who are in work poverty, that's a big issue. We're going to end 0 hours contracts in particular because that keeps people trapped. They may not be given hours, but they also may not be given work. So there's a bind. I don't believe that it's people who are work shy, who just want to enjoy their life on benefits. I don't know if anyone's been on benefits. It's not a great time. It's in-work poverty that we're really trying to focus on and to fight. And then for child poverty, which is also at levels in working that are unacceptable, Labour is saying in our fully costed manifesto, you can read online, that came out yesterday, we are saying that we are going to introduce breakfast clubs into every single primary school so that children have one decent meal at least provided by the state. It's fully costed. There are no hidden tricks in that aspect of things. So it's housing, it's work, and it's tackling the education side of things, I guess, by giving children that meal at school that we kind of want to focus on. And I think it's rich to say that when you're in a position of power on the council or an MP, that it's someone else's issue. Those are privileged roles that you hold that mean you can represent and support your constituents. And I think that hasn't been done to the level that it needs to be done here in Woking.
Thank you very much. I think we'll move on. We've had 15 minutes hearing from everyone on that first question. Right. And I'm going to come to you next, Jonathan, as we start the next question, if you want to add anything very briefly. I will just ask everyone to be super concise here on in so that we try and get to as many questions as we can. Next question. Again, a few different people asking questions along these lines. Hospitals, primary care, dental care, and all associated NHS provision is cracking under the strain, and people are dying while waiting. What action needs to be taken to put things right? I'm not going to come to everyone, but we will start with Jonathan.
Okay. So just one brief thing. I think you've been left with a misleading impression by Councillor Forster, because he said he didn't vote for the Victoria Arch, which of course is the railway bridge, but he did vote for Victoria Square. So by a country mile, the biggest scheme, the biggest amount of loans, hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds, was on the Victoria Square development. So that's the Marches Towers, it's the retail units, it's the hotel, and so on. So that's disingenuous. You did vote for those. Indeed, you proposed a key motion that got them passed. Well, okay? Let me just clear that up.
Okay. Coming back to the question,
on health, look, I'm delighted with a question on health, and a lot needs to be done. A lot of it is in terms of reform and new state-of-the-art facilities. And of course, here we have, in our community hospital, we have the Bedser Hub, which, for those who don't know, help the perhaps slightly frailer elderly, with apologies to anyone in the room who uses the Bedser Hub, but everyone who uses it and the families that support them say it's fantastic, because it's all about giving older folks, if you like, a health MOT on a regular basis. They're available on the phone as well, and that helps to keep them healthier, happier, safer, longer in their own homes without having to call so much on a GP or, God forbid, accident and emergency. So that's an amazing, innovative scheme, started here in Woking. I was delighted to have helped secure it and to have cut the ribbon and opened it. And more recently, we've got that new diagnostic hub that I've secured. And the current government is building 150 of those across England. It's fantastic that we've managed to secure one for our community hospital, state-of-the-art. It will save the residents of Woking tens of thousands of trips a year that would otherwise have to happen go to Ashford or St Peter's Hospital. So it's that sort of reform and extra state-of-the-art investment that we need in our health service. Look, health has been well funded in the most recent years. 192 billion pounds of taxpayers' money a year goes into health. 50,000 more nurses have been additional nurses now work in our health service compared to 2019. But we do need those additional reforms, and I know that the NHS has been struggling post-COVID. to get back on track.
Will, we'll come to you next, as there were obviously some criticisms levelled directly at you there, and for your answer as well on this health question.
Thank you, Justin. So I didn't propose the thing that Jonathan mentioned, but I'm actually going to answer the question that I think residents want me to hear, which is about healthcare. Our health system is broken, and the public know the Conservatives have broken it. My heart goes out to NHS workers that are on strike. I don't think they want to go on strike. There needs to be a fair pay settlement so they can get back to work, and the government needs to negotiate with them properly. The Lib Dems, we want to hire more GPs and doctors. We want to introduce free personal care, and we want to properly invest in mental health. The Lib Dems have got a plan to hire 8,000 new GPs and make a guarantee that people can see their GP in a week or 24 hours if it's urgent. I imagine there's many in the audience that can't get hold of their GP for love nor money. Therefore, you go to the walk-in hospital, Ashford St Peters. That's not sensible. We need to properly have the front-of-house part of the NHS better, and that's the GPs. Social care is in absolute crisis. The Lib Dems will introduce free personal care like there is in Scotland, so that vulnerable elderly people who need help with daily tasks can get support. And by getting people out of hospital, stopping them going to hospital in the first place, it will help our NHS, and it's investing in social care that's so vital. And then there's mental health. Mental health has been the Cinderella service for the NHS for so long. That's not acceptable. Not acceptable at all. We want to introduce a mental health professional in every school and mental health hubs in every community. And the last thing I would say, yes, NHS has struggled because of COVID, but COVID aside, it is not an acceptable condition, and that is a fault of underfunding and government decisions.
Thank you. We'll just have one more comment. I'll go to Essie for that.
Thank you. So, yeah, I think it's clear to everyone in this room, everyone who uses the NHS or engages with our health services, which is all of us, that it is in dire straits. It is, it's been chronically underfunded by this Conservative government for 14 years. It's no surprise. We have our doctors on strike, nurses, ambulance workers, first responders. No one is happy with the current situation, but also nobody wants to be on strike. They want to be doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is helping people and saving lives. Labour has a plan in our fully costed manifesto to introduce 40,000 new appointments weekly, evening and weekend. That will be funded by going after non-domiciled tax avoiders. That will raise over £1 billion for us to be able to do that. With that money, we will also introduce 8,500 new mental health specialists, because we recognise, particularly after COVID and the lockdowns, that there is a growing mental health crisis in Woking and across the country. We want to attack that head on by raising its status within the health industry. And finally, we also have really ambitious plans to create. We created the NHS, of which we're very proud. We want to create a national care service, because we understand that social care has really, really struggled over this last 14 years of Tory austerity. Under that national care service, we'll join up all the different services that people who use it have to struggle with to get answers. We'll join everything up. We will have a home-first policy, meaning we will try everything in our power to keep people in their homes, so that first, before any other interventions. We will fight for fair pay for care workers, because it's integral. We want it to be a career, not a job. And we understand that there is a huge amount of unpaid carers in our community. We want to centralise their experiences by offering them key support and also offering them time away from caring, because we know that carer burnout is real.
Okay, thank you very much. I did see a hand from Natalie. I'll just very, very brief comment, and then we're going to move on to the next question.
The NHS is extremely important to me, and I used to work in the community hospital, so I was completely stunned when a friend of mine who uses it a lot told me that she'd received a letter saying that the hospital is now being run by a company called Virgin Health. And I went and had a little look online and searched on Companies House. It is a company which is in the ownership, it looks to me, like of an American private equity firm. I don't know how many people know that in Woking, and I don't know why none of the other parties are talking about that. That means that the investments into the hospital, like the scanners, like the parking bit which is being built at the moment, are being built at public expense, and the profit is going to go to the private equity company. I don't think that's acceptable, and that's why I'm happy that the Green Party is standing for making sure that the NHS does not continue with this covert privatisation. That is behind the crisis in mental health as well. 85% of mental health services are also provided by private companies, and that's why it is not working.
All right, thank you. Well, I'll come to you for the next question, and if you want to just try and weave this in as well, that's fine, Richard. Okay. So we've been contacted by a former small business owner in Woking who sadly had to close an independent store in Woking Town Centre last year. Woking Borough Council has obviously suffered severe difficulties. We've also experienced town centre decline. So this person asked, what are your plans at a local level to salvage or reinvent our town? Secondly, on a national level, will there be an overhaul of business rates to support small to medium-sized enterprises? Richard, why don't you start us off?
Very much, Justin. I just wanted to say very briefly on the last comment about there was a lot of discussion on the supply side for the NHS, but no discussion on demand. And it comes back to that extra 2 million people we have in the country in the last 3 years, which create huge demand as well. So we need to address that going forward to balance supply and demand.
Okay.
That's the only comment I want to make.
Thank you for the
it's
comment.
just simple economics of supply and demand.
Okay. What about Woking Town Centre?
So Woking Town Centre. There's a raft of businesses, all run by individuals, SMEs, and there may be a variety of different reasons for each business. I personally would just like to go and talk to them, talk to people, listen to what the issues are. There are some ones we can assume there are, and I'll come to those in a minute. But each business will have its individual issues. So talk and listen is the first thing we should always do. So secondly, we obviously have we've got the Chamber of Commerce, and we have the Surrey Business Leaders Forum, and I think there's an Asian forum as well. And they can, I don't know to what extent they work together to be effective, and that's something that I would look into. I haven't had a chance to look into that, but there's clearly forums that already exist that we can leverage, and that's obviously very useful. Reforms policies would be, and this is absolutely key to the gentleman concerned, because whenever you lose a business, it's absolute tragedy for the person. It's highly stressful, and it's a loss for the high street. So reform's key policy for the high street is that all SMEs that have a presence on the high street, we would scrap business rates altogether, gone, and we would fund it with a 4% levy on online delivery tax for the large multinationals who basically, this is the web delivery services. So this just creates a level playing field, because at the moment our high streets are right across the country, they're fading. You know, how many closed shop fronts have we seen? It's a tragedy, quite frankly, and we need to level that playing field. We've also removed red tape by lifting the VAT threshold rate to £150,000 a year. That's going to make a lot of difference by taking small business out of that threshold, out of that window, so they don't have to do all that VAT paperwork. And again, another tax, we would lift corporation tax, the minimum amount payable to a £100,000 threshold. It's currently at £50,000, so we would reduce the amount of corporation tax. And finally, the tax code in this country is just ludicrously complicated. I think Reform estimates it's 21,000 pages of tax code. You know, Hong Kong's got 500 pages. Why are we burying ourselves in vast amounts of red tape and making reporting to HMRC stupidly complicated? I mean, when I talked to I think it was the owner of the brewery in Naphill, he said, I'm just fed up with the amount of reporting I have to do to HMRC. It's just constant. I said, I'm getting fed up with it. We need to stop those kind of stories. We need to save our businesses, because only by having thriving, growing businesses, reducing our taxation, are we going to grow ourselves out of this mess that we are in.
Okay, thank you. We'll come to... I think we'll go to you, Tim, and then to Will, and then I'd like to hear a response as well. So do try to keep these brief, these comments, please.
Actually, the microphone's on. Actually, I agree with pretty much everything Richard said, so I will be relatively brief in that sense.
Good.
There is one thing I do need to, two things to add, in fact. Number one, there are some companies that are effectively, multinational companies, that are effectively dumping their costs on us by tiering and the way they operate their supply chains. And we need to look very closely at that. A lot of these people are zipping around on mopeds, that sort of thing. They're offloading costs on society, accidents, all this stuff. They're not necessarily paying their way. And historically, we've set up a situation where businesses compete with an online thing that's not paying the same tax rate. Yeah, the results are obvious, okay? But there's an underlying problem here, and I'm going to slightly push back at the health service thing as well, because the implication is, you're not left to centre, so you don't care. That's not true. I was looking at some of the health service statistics, and we don't get as good a results as a lot of countries, okay? We don't get as good a results for the same amount of money we spend. We don't get as good a results as Australia. Had a night in an Australian hospital a couple of months ago. Lovely place, I have to tell you. They spend more per head on health service than we do. However, here's the killer. It's a smaller percentage of their GDP. And this is the thing also we must not forget. If we let our economy go, all this conversation is beside the point. Britain imports its food, it's going to import more and more of its energy. If we don't do something to pay for all of that, we can have as many arguments and discussions and virtue signal to our heart's content. In the end, nothing will happen. And the problem with the NHS is it's become a sacred item where we can't have rational discussion. And a problem with a lot of public services is they end up working hardest for the people they see the most often. And the people they see the most often are their employees. Okay. It becomes their employees vote for Labour or a left-wing party to look after them by keeping their organisation going. Okay? The outcomes of the NHS should not be acceptable to us.
We'll move on to Will now. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. So the Liberal Democrats and I have got a comprehensive offer to businesses, and we need to grow our economy. And I talked in my introduction why I'm running. So I think things are broken. Our laws are so outdated. Business rates hammer small businesses because they focus on the value of their shopfront property, whereas Amazon and Google get off almost scot-free. The Liberal Democrats will treble the digital tax to make sure Amazon and Google and organisations like that pay their fair share. But we'll replace business rates by a commercial landlord levy. So to bring our laws and bring our taxation into the 21st century. And you asked to be brief, and I will talk about this briefly. An issue that sets me apart from the other male people on the panel is the B word, is Brexit. Brexit was a mistake. It wasn't something that Brexit was not something Woking voted for, and it has cost us tens of billions of pounds from our economy.
Thank you. Let's let Will finish his point. Thank you.
The Liberal Democrats will restore the UK's place in Europe. We need to rebuild relations with Europe and get back into single market.
Jonathan, quick comment, please. And just to remind everyone, this is about the regeneration of Woking Borough Council Town Centre. Is actually the question under discussion.
So I think it's a little bit of a stretch to blame Brexit for that. Look, our town centre is doing better than many others. We all know that bricks and mortar retail has issues in this online world that we now live in. So look, in terms of business rates specifically was mentioned, so the government has stopped the business rates multiplier for the last 4 years, but I am open to higher digital or delivery taxes to help the bricks and mortar retailers. So look, I think that the big redevelopment in the town centre should have been left to the commercial world. It's quite clear that the council didn't have the right skills and competences to bring that off properly. But before that, there was some really good minor regeneration. So that repaving of Jubilee Square and Commercial Way, and the wraparound, the indoor market, the wraparound, modern-looking Jubilee Square that we now have. And in the summer, try to bring people in by showing Wimbledon and having those restaurateurs showing their wares and so on and so forth. I think that's great. We do have a far more vibrant town square and town centre now than we had 15 years ago. We must keep looking at those small important things that will help that going forward, including the fact that we increasingly have a population that actually lives in the town centre. So, there will be more building in the town centre, and if we can have a young, vibrant community actually living there, that helps the retailers and the coffee shops, etc., etc.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's go to another question, but this time we'll go to Slido. So this has come in. This is the most popular question at the moment. You can, by the way, upvote questions on the Slido app if you're using that. I'll ask this actually of the two female panellists because it's very relevant. What is your position on women's sex-based rights? The right to access single-sex spaces, services, and the right to fairness and safety via single-sex sports. It's obviously quite a contested question currently in our culture. I'll start with Essie and then come to Natalie.
Thank you. So I think that is a question that I've had a lot on the doorstep, and I can understand that it's very emotive for a lot of people. In Labour, we want to make sure that we can modernise and streamline that process of gender recognition for people who identify as trans. We think it's very important to previously it's been quite a medicalised and in some ways dehumanising process, so we want to streamline that and make that simpler for them. We also recognise that there are real concerns, valid concerns, and safeguarding issues around spaces based on gender or based on sex, and we want to listen to people. It's a debate we're having internally within the party, we're having generally with voters, and we don't think there's any easy or simple solutions to this concern. It's a very modern problem, but we are working really hard. We're reviewing our processes, and we think that there are kind of developments that we can make within this space, but we have to accept that people desire to, they need to be recognised for their gender that they identify with, in addition to understanding that people have valid safeguarding concerns and trying to marry those two things. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. Natalie, do you want to add anything there?
This is quite an important question for me because I do quite a lot of work with people like victims of domestic abuse and with the women's sector. So I'm aware, and also on the other side, I do human rights-based work. And so this is an area where the rights of people from the transgender community appear to be conflicting with the rights of women. It's, I was thinking about it the other day. I think that there is such a thing as absolute rights, and there is an absolute right to safety from physical attack, etc. So I agree with what Essie said. I think that there is certainly something around spaces where safeguarding of women is important. That there's been quite a lot of contentious stuff about this, but it's come to the time where we have got to have respectful and open conversations about this. The silencing of debate that's been going on is not helpful, and we have to, I think, listen and be prepared to have respectful debate and find solutions that work for everyone without discriminating and without putting anybody at risk.
Thank you. Again, just very briefly, perhaps Jonathan and Will could comment on this one as well.
Sure. So look, I think women need safe spaces, and I do think that to that end, there shouldn't be self-ID, because unfortunately, some people have used self-ID, and we've had instances of rape and so on in women's prisons. So it's getting that balance right. I know it's a very emotional and contested debate, but I think there is a way through that. For example, it also strikes me that it's ludicrous to have biological males in women's sport. I think we all saw those pictures a year or two ago of an American swimmer who was a biological male, and they were winning all their races by a length against all of the biologically female competitors. So it's striking to me as common sense that we should have biological females competing against biological females.
Will.
So I think what I would add to this, I think the starting point needs to be, we need to have sympathy and understanding to someone who feels they've been born in the wrong body. They are an incredibly vulnerable person. I can't imagine what's that like. What's that like? We need to have that understanding and sympathy. If you start with that understanding and sympathy, and you want to protect vulnerable women who are concerned about that, I think you'll come to a lot better answer than we've seen over the rhetoric and hate over the last couple of years on this issue.
All right, thank you. I'm going to read one of the questions that have come in on the card now. And this is very specifically to Jonathan Will, so I will start with you both, and then we'll move to some more questions on Slido. This is specifically, Jonathan Will, aimed at you because you are the two candidates who have served Woking locally and nationally on the panel. And this person wants to ask, could you explain firstly, Jonathan, why you think you are a better choice than Will to represent Woking at a local and national level? And then Will, why you think you are a better choice than Jonathan to represent? So this is a chance to go at it, folks.
Okay.
Okay.
So look, I'm first of all, I like to think that I'm an assiduous, hard-working MP. I mentioned some of the things that I do for the community and individuals and charities within it in my opening remarks. Even those who have very different political views to me will normally acknowledge that, and that's nice, because I take pride in that, in being a good constituency MP and a good MP for people to come and see with their issues. As I say, I think I have been a strong voice in Parliament for Woking, including helping to secure all those monies recently for the fantastic new diagnostic hub that we're going to have at our community hospital. Talking of diagnostic hubs, I see that my opponent has been implying very strongly in all of his literature, and I've got some of it here, that he secured it. And the project director didn't even know who Will was. He did put a congratulatory motion into council to say, isn't it great we're having a new diagnostic hub? I was in the gallery cheering that along with the Conservative councillors that were left at the time in the council. But at no point did he acknowledge my role in that. Subsequently, the council has provided some cut-price parking for the nurses and operatives at the community hospital in Heathside car park, which is great. But it comes. I think you want an MP, whatever their political views, who are straight with you. So I don't think Will's been straight in his leaflets on that issue. And just coming back, Will, you did propose a motion to council. It was seconded by John Kingsbury, who was the council leader at the time. It was the cross-party motion that opened up several £100 million for that Victoria Square development. So again, I think Woking deserves an MP who is straight with them, whatever their political views. Okay. And I will always be that.
Will, why do you believe you are better suited as the next candidate for Woking?
Well, as I said in my introduction, I don't think Woking's been on the right lines for years. And Jonathan has been on the wrong side of all those issues. He voted to cut council grants. He said...
So did the Lib Dems in coalition. That's when the main cuts came in. And the Lib Dems voted for it as well. That's where the main cuts to local government came in, when we were clearing up the mess.
Will a chance
So
to respond.
local government funding has been cut by 25% since 2016. 25% since 2016. That's not acceptable. The Conservatives, including Jonathan, encouraged councils to borrow money. They then abolished the Audit Commission, which stopped checking up on councils. Jonathan said he was cautiously optimistic about the Victoria Square development and all the things the council are doing now. He's running away from his responsibility and his party's responsibility. We've been elected to clear up that mess. And I think motivation is incredibly important in politics. I want to be the MP for my hometown. I want to represent us in Parliament and fight for the vulnerable. Jonathan has made his home here, but he's not from Woking. I will never take you for granted. I will put you front and centre. And I'll be nicer about Jonathan than he's been about me. I'll try to be a bit more statesman. Jonathan and I have actually worked together on the NHS issue. And I think Jonathan helped me achieve that. He wouldn't have come. I did. Jonathan, you wouldn't have come to the council on a debate when we were working with the NHS to bring health services to Woking if you didn't think it was important.
So look, that is completely ludicrous. It was a congratulatory motion to try and get the credit after it had happened when you didn't know it was happening.
Okay.
And that's clear to most people who know anything about this.
There'll be more opportunities for some back and forth. We're going. I'm sorry.
And on another, he's also just been very misleading. He will not find anything on the record where I have encouraged the Victoria Square development.
Okay.
Not one thing. So there you go. You're misleading again.
Let's keep calm, everyone. Thank you. Will, quick response, and then I am going to go to the next question after that. Thank you.
Jonathan, you said you'll find nothing on the record.
No, nothing.
What? No, just,
or off the record.
But what have you done for 14 years if we can't find anything on the record, one way or another, that you haven't talked about this issue? And a lot of residents feel you've not been an active MP. Rightly or wrongly, I will take a side and advocate for Woking. And people will hear my voice loud and clear in Parliament and in the constituency. Something that hasn't happened over the last 14 years.
We are going to draw a line there. Thank you very much, everyone. So we've had another question in on Slido, and this actually came in as well in advance. So this is obviously important for a number of people in Woking. Would you support VAT on private schools? So this is the question really about proposals to potentially either, add VAT to the schools or whether it should be scrapped and so on. Let's start with Richard, if that's okay, and then we'll see who else wants to pick this up.
Absolutely not. It only has disadvantages right across the board. And no one actually even thinks about the children in the private schools that are going to have to get moved. No one even considers them for a second. I've not heard one person say, what about those kids? Not one. Has anyone? Raise your hand if you've heard anything about those children who will have to be moved because those incredibly hard-working parents who can't afford another 20%. People think, oh, it's the super rich. No, these are really hard-working people who do their utmost to get their kids into a school of their choice. And this is envy politics. It has no benefit at all, because all it's going to do is force a load of children out of the private system into the state system that will then be overwhelmed with, there will be no extra money because they're going to need more teachers, more classrooms, more schools. So who benefits? No one benefits. This is a disgrace. It's an envy tax. It's typical socialism, and it's wrong.
Okay. Now, this is a policy that's been proposed, obviously, by Labour. So, Essie, do you want to speak to this?
Yes, thank you. This is a policy that we kind of came out with 4 years ago and have been steadily building towards. And I've had many conversations on the doorstep about this issue for many people, and I understand the concern. But the logic behind it is that 9 out of 10 children go to a state school, and our state schools are in a terrible state, literally crumbling around our kids. We're trying to raise the quality of those schools to match those that we're seeing in other parts of the education system. The Institute for Fiscal Studies has said that there's very unlikely to be an influx of privately educated children into the state school, even if there were to be quite a small number, easy to absorb. Another aspect of that is that this cost, the VAT cost, is not necessarily going to be passed on to parents by private schools. Some have indicated that they won't. Private school costs have risen for the last 20 years ahead of inflation, ahead of earnings, and so it would seem like that cost may not be passed on to parents by some schools. But we have to recognize that our state schools are in a really dire state, and through this kind of cost saving, as I said, our manifesto, we have to make difficult choices. This is one that we made. With this money, we will be able to recruit 6,500 new teachers in key subject areas. Currently, children are being taught by teachers who are not subject experts. So it's someone who studied English who's teaching maths, or vice versa. We really want to raise our standards in state schools, and that was the logic behind that policy. But I recognize from my conversations on the doorsteps that it has been tough for many hardworking middle-class parents who just want to give their kids the best start in life. But we had to make difficult choices as part of our manifesto, and this was one of those.
Okay, we'll take one quick comment, perhaps very brief, if you would, Will and Tim, and then we'll go to another question, because we are only 10 minutes away from starting to wrap up our question.
VAT on private schools, no.
Okay, thank you. Tim?
No, and it hides an underlying problem that parents don't have a choice on education that's sufficiently good. I'm somebody who's spent over £150,000 sending my child to an independent school. That is money after I paid my tax for the school place beforehand. And you know why I did it? Because I didn't like any of the schools, the way they taught science in Woking at the time. I went round and I looked. I would much rather have kept the money, to be frank. I would like to see more choice in education, and I would like to see parents having a stronger say. The problem with this state approach is they tell you what's good for you. They tell you what your child should be getting. They tell you, oh, it doesn't matter about your child not being able to study the subjects they want, or having no discipline in the school, or whatever. And the parents who pay this money is real money, okay? There's a lot of people who are quite hard put up, and frankly, it is the politics of envy. It's also slightly daft, because it is going to lose some of the money, regardless of which Blairite think tank you want to quote. And in the end, it's not fixing the real problem, which is one of the only good things the Conservatives have clearly got right was their education reforms. They did two things. They got phonics into primary schools, and they got a couple of schools, particularly London. London state schools are some of the best in the country now, okay? And it doesn't matter where you came from or what you are, the results coming out of London schools are great, and that is the result of reforms.
Okay.
And that is what every parent should have. 20% VAT, this is fiddling.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I can see that more people want.
Just very briefly. There are 1,300 pupils at Woking's independent schools. There are thousands more of Woking pupils at independent schools outside of Woking. 2 of our independent school head teachers have come to me saying they are worried about the future of their school and how many parents are either pulling their children out or not sending the younger siblings. So it would not surprise me if this policy ends up costing more than it saves.
Very brief comment, please, Ezzy. Thank you.
To add that, to be clear, that children who have special educational needs and have a healthcare plan certified by the authority, they are exempt from this tax. So there are some exemptions that are made as part of this policy. I also just want to add that the Tory manifesto is uncosted. The other parties have never been governed, so it's doubtful that any of their policies will have to actually meet reality, and I think that's something to bear in mind.
All right, thank you. Right, we're going to go to another question from Slido.
Because I've just been challenged directly there. And all you need to do is scrap with net zero, and you'll save about 50 billion to 100 billion a year. It's an absolute fantasy. Don't take kids out of school, just scrap net zero.
Thank you.
It is economic suicide, and if you look into it, It's a disaster for the country and the West.
Okay, well, we've got another
Thank you.
question here that will get, I'm sure, everyone riled up. This is specifically asked for you, Jonathan, but I'll share it around as well after this. Why did you vote for Brexit in Parliament when Woking voted 66% to remain?
Okay, so that's not the right figure, actually. It's estimated we'll just get the facts right, first of all. So it's estimated that Woking, by the top psephologists, because it included Woking constituency at the time included the Guildford villages, Purbright and Normandy. But the figures are that Woking is estimated to have voted 44% leave, 56% remain. And I was very clear in passing the legislation through Parliament for the referendum. Most other MPs were as well, although many of them didn't abide by it, that I would respect the result of the referendum of the British people. It's as simple as that. If it had been a Remain vote, I would have respected that. It was a Brexit vote, so I respected that.
Okay. Do you want to say something in response, Jonathan?
I've talked about Brexit before, so I'll be mindful of time. I've clearly said what my view is. I think a key part of this is, do you have an MP that genuinely represents you in Parliament? And on this issue, I'm more in touch with Woking than Jonathan is.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to another question. Perhaps this time a number of people wanted to ask specifically about climate change. So this person asks, how would you respond to the letter published on Monday last week, signed by 408 members of the UK's climate science community, calling for an acceleration in actions by this country, firstly, to lead by example internationally on climate change, secondly, to help the UK adapt to climate change, and thirdly, to increase funding for developing countries that suffer the most from the effects of climate change but do little to contribute to its cause? Why don't we start with the Green Party candidate, Natalie?
Well, I welcome that letter and the concern about climate change. I have a friend who works in a business which is concerned with climate change, who suffers from anxiety because of the knowledge of the way things are. I'm very concerned about the changes in the weather systems, and I used to do a lot of travelling around Europe, and I saw the way that things are organised in countries like Germany, for example, with there's plenty of solar power. I've seen a good project off the coast of Brighton, which is generating enough energy offshore in a wind farm to be able to power a town. We do need to look for more sustainable, renewable sources of energy that don't contribute to further heating of the climate urgently. However, I do accept that there are always trade-offs, that we have got to be aware of what they are and make our decisions with our eyes wide open, making sure that we're always maximising the common good and putting in place measures that ameliorate any negative impacts, for example, of impacts on wildlife or perhaps from mining components for batteries and things. So, okay. Yeah, I'd say, I'd welcome it, but always a note of caution as well. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Richard, would you like to speak to this quickly?
Well, if anyone wants to read up my article that came out in the Woking News and Mail yesterday, you'll have my views in full. So I'm a geoscientist, and I've worked in the oil and gas industry for 30 years. I've basically studied the Earth for that long. First of all, it amazes me how anyone who questions anthropogenic climate change, because we're not talking about climate change, because climate change has always happened, is happening, and will always happen. It is a natural cycle. Natural cyclicity of the Earth. But the question is, to what degree is anthropogenic climate change warming the planet?
And by that you mean?
Anthropogenic means man-made,
yeah.
So it means due to the emissions of CO2. And the voices that are skeptical about that, or say, well, we just don't know, are silenced. They're just not heard. They're not put in the media. They're nowhere. There was recently a paper put out by 1,500 geoscientists signed, saying highly skeptical of the amount of anthropogenic climate change. I'm going to give you one paper, and I've even got a copy of it here. Well, I actually haven't got it on me, but so the Norwegian Statistical Office last September, so this is the government statistical office of one of the most progressive countries in the world when it comes to climate change. They basically came out and published a very lengthy document, and it's based on absolute real data, not just hyperbole and exaggeration and alarmism. This is based on data that, with the current level of knowledge that we have, it is impossible to tell to what degree of warming there is in terms of the present warming cycle from anthropogenic changes, from CO2. It's impossible to tell statistically because we are in a natural warming cycle. We're coming out of the last ice age ended, about 10,000 years ago. The Earth's warmed about 7 or 8 degrees. But even in the last 1,000 years, we have had significant changes. Europe was warmer about 1,000 years ago. You can look it up. Look up all the Norse settlements on Greenland where you've actually got farming.
I'm going to press you to
I'm just going
to
to
come to a
this
sort
is
of
so
conclusion.
important because
Yeah.
this is going to bankrupt the country because it is driving net zero, and net zero is driving our insane energy policy because I'm afraid wind energy is the most expensive form of energy that we've got pretty much. It is grotesquely subsidized. Will talked about, oh, you're going to put a windfall tax on oil and gas. There's already a windfall tax on oil and gas. It's 75%. 75%. It's an industry that's barely surviving.
Right.
It's barely surviving. Essie, you want to make it 78%.
Okay.
That's your policy. You're going to kill it off. Meanwhile, we import vast amounts of LNG from the United States and from Qatar. Basically, because when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, you have to have all that entire grid of renewable energy backed up 100% by dependable energy, being, particularly in our case, gas and nuclear. And if that wasn't there, the lights would go out. And we're now dependent on imports of not just gas, but of electricity through interconnectors from Europe. Go and look at the National Grid website. It's all there.
Unfortunately, we are more or less out of time. So I'm going to go to Will, and then we're going to go to our final.
3 trillion, by the way.
Okay.
National Grid say it will cost £3 trillion by 2050. Okay. That's 100 billion a year. That'll pay for your education.
Okay. All right.
10 times over.
I want to hear one more perspective on this. I'll go to Will, and then we'll go to our final statement.
Sorry, Justin.
Who said politicians were all the same? The environment is in crisis. We need to take steps to fight climate change. And the Liberal Democrats are proud...
Let's allow Will to give us his thoughts, please.
The Liberal Democrats are proud environmentalists. We want to protect our green belt. We want to reduce carbon emissions. We need to protect our environment for our future generation. It's the most important thing we do as human beings, pass the torch on to the next generation. And Jonathan and I were opponents in 2019 when we were actually here. And I partly wanted to say this to move on slightly from just talking about climate change. The Liberal Democrats had a plan in 2019 that by 2025, we would insulate all low-income houses. They would be properly insulated. They'd be energy efficient. Because we cared about poverty and we cared about the environment. I'm caring about the environment, but I'm particularly caring about fighting poverty. Imagine if that policy had been implemented in 2019, how much better off vulnerable people would have been through the cost of living crisis. They wouldn't have had to struggle. They wouldn't have had to go to food banks because their energy bills through the roof. It was a mistake not to implement energy efficiency back in 2019, and we need to implement it straight away, especially for low-income households now.
Thank you very much. Can we have a round of applause for all of our candidates? The time has obviously flown by. We've only got to a small fraction of the questions, and I understand that there's going to be lots of other opinions that could have been shared from the panel and from the audience. But what we're going to do now is to hear from each of our candidates again. Each will have 2 minutes. We're going to go the opposite direction to the one we had before. So we're going to start with Essie from Labour, and we'll begin your 2 minutes now. Thank you.
Thank you. On July 4th, you're going to have to make a really important decision on whether you think things are getting better or worse, about whether you want things to stay the same or to change. Woking is a really tight race. It's going to be really close between the three main parties. Some polls are saying it's too close to call. So it's you who are going to have to decide what you want your town to be. Do you want it to be a town led by the Conservative Party, a party that thought it was acceptable to party during lockdown, to crash our economy, to put out an unfunded manifesto? Do you want this to be a town led by the Liberal Democrats, a party that have always sided with the Conservatives, that voted in favour of the investments that led to Woking's effective bankruptcy? Or do you want to be a town led by Labour? We have a fully costed manifesto, as I've said many times this evening. We've been transparent about what we can do and what we can't do. And we've been really committed to changing our party and bringing it to where it is now, and we are committed to helping to change Woking. I'm an optimist. I wouldn't be in politics if I wasn't. And I hope that you will choose optimism and vote Labour. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Will.
Right across Woking, I have spoken and importantly listened to thousands of people over the last days, weeks, months, years. And people are furious with this government. They're furious with the Conservatives. I've never seen anything like it. And I want to share that frustration, but I particularly want to offer hope. I think our town and our country can be better than what we are at the moment. And there is hope in this election if you vote for it, if you vote for change. I hope this evening I have showed that I am positive. I don't go for other candidates. I am the candidate with the integrity, who's committed to public service here in Woking. Someone that will stand up for our local community, champion the issues that matter to you most. We've been failed by an MP who's been in government and the government party for 14 years. The Labour alternative is to have a Labour MP who will be in the government party there. That is a mistake. We need an MP who will represent Woking to Westminster, not government down to our town. We need a fair deal, and we need someone that finally fights for us and puts Woking first. And that is me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Natalie, do give us your final thoughts.
I really do believe this is a make or break moment. I believe it's make or break for whether we will have a public national health service in the future. I have American friends who have had to crowdfund their cancer treatment. It's pitiful because in a cost of greed crisis, people don't have the money to pay for other people's healthcare, which costs tens of thousands of dollars and soon pounds. If you vote for the Liberal Democrats, if you vote for Labour, and if you vote for the Conservatives, because none of those three parties are prepared to commit to maintaining an NHS in public ownership. The same goes for the water companies, the energy companies, and all of those privately owned companies which are stripping assets from our nation and impoverishing our communities. And the same goes for stopping the trade in children. I have not heard any of the main parties talk about this. And by definition, if the Green Party is prepared to stop private ownership, it will be bringing the care sector back out of private hands as well. I don't believe the people of Woking should assume the debt that this town has taken on. I think that you deserve to have somebody from another party who is aware of the funny business that has been going on and will scrutinise what has been happening in Woking and in Parliament.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Natalie. Tim Reid.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid I just have to give a little bit of my time to say this. I'm afraid before you vote for Will, you need to get on the Woking Borough Council website and you need to look up the minutes of the 8th of December 2016. The reference is AQ 120899. Take a look, compare to what he said today and make up your own mind. Okay? You need to do that. Next, but by the way, Will, if I had been a councillor who had voted this stuff through, I would have felt a moral obligation to resign from public life. I was toying with the idea of not saying that, but from what I've heard today, absolutely, you are unfit. I mean that. What else can I say in the few seconds I've got left? Nick Clegg said, oh, I won't build a nuclear power station because it won't be ready till 2020. Thanks, Lib Dems. That's a good one. If you want to know where the energy thing is taking you, look at Germany. Germany has been destroyed by the effect of expensive energy. Their industrial sector is absolutely in ruins. And you want to see the political output, you can see it on your TV screens now, okay, all over Europe. The thing that has driven Europe absolutely stark raving cross, let me be polite, is the green policies that were imposed by the unelected government scheme, which, by the way, we did vote for, okay? I don't understand the Liberal Democrats. They're not Liberal and they're not Democrats. They have never respected the referendum. My last point is a point of warning, okay? Hidden behind the agendas coming in is a threat to human life. Human life that is dependent on another human should not be ended just because that dependency is awkward or difficult. You wait. Euthanasia, getting rid of people already. The Canadian government will tell you how much money they save for every person that they put through their medical assisted dying scheme. All this stuff is coming along with a large majority Labour government. Okay? I warn you, it may not be their policy, but their MPs will vote it through. Think hard about how you vote. Every vote is counted and they pay attention to the way you vote. The election is already decided. Okay. Vote for your conscience.
All right, thank you very much. Richard.
Just before I start, analysing the cost of energy scenarios, pathways to net zero by National Grid, every pathway, £3 trillion by 2050. That's 100 billion a year from 2020 when this was written. We've had 30% inflation since then, so it's now 4 trillion. I can't even use the word here, sorry. The most expensive electricity in the world, Denmark. Why? Because it has the greatest proportion of wind energy in its grid. Right, I'll start. Ladies and gentlemen, Great Britain stands on a precipice. Never before has the choice at a general election been more stark, yet never more simple. This is the choice before you. Vote for any of the established parties, offering essentially the same policies. It's just a question of how quickly they break the nation. Or vote for Reform UK. This is a choice between common sense policies for a prosperous Britain or deeper socialism driven by global elites. Between freedom of speech and choice or an ever-expanding state dictating your options and limiting your freedoms. Between low taxation and a growing economy, or high taxation and stagnation. Between controlled immigration and borders, or uncontrolled immigration. Between affordable energy security, or unaffordable, net zero-driven energy policy. Between environmental policies based on science, or based on alarmism. Between protection of British values, culture and history, or a country that is splintered. Between restoring excellence in public services or continued dysfunction. Between an end to divisive woke culture or its continuing division of our society. Finally, between democracy and sovereignty or ceding our powers externally. This is your choice. Reform UK is where you need to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And finally, Jonathan Lord.
So I wasn't invited to comment on net zero, but I will just say this. This country, in the last 20 years, has halved our carbon emissions whilst growing our economy by 80%.
Thank you. Let's just allow Jonathan
that is true.
to give his final
by
statement.
80%, growing the economy. So we need to do it in a pragmatic way, including more nuclear. So look, we've all been through the wars with COVID and the continuing aftermath of the dreadful war in Ukraine. But this country is bouncing back. We are on the right track. The UK economy is growing faster than Germany, France, Italy, and Spain. Inflation's fallen to 2.3%, lower than the US and most of Europe. 4 million new jobs created since 2010. Our primary school children are the best readers in the world. We've led the world and are still leading the world in terms of that fight in Ukraine and supporting Ukraine. Because if we don't win there, goodness knows what Putin would do next. And indeed, we've got China limbering up in the margins as well, with ill wishes towards the Western world. So there is a lot at stake at this election. I think that the Labour Party would be a disaster. They're trying to get into government without really telling you what they're going to do, and I don't think that's good enough. And I do think that Rishi Sunak has a clear plan and he's a good Prime Minister, and I'm still supporting him. More than that, I have always represented Woking in Westminster, and not Westminster in Woking. I have been a hard-working Member of Parliament, and I give it to you straight. And on the basis of tonight, I would like you to judge me against others on that. I would love, more than anything else, to continue as your representative in Parliament. And if so elected, I would continue to be a strong, honest voice for all of you in Parliament. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Wow. It's been a really interesting, exciting evening. Thank you all for coming out this evening, and whoever you're voting for on the 4th of July, I hope that tonight has been helpful in helping you to make that decision. But now let's give one more round of applause to all of our candidates this evening. As you go, if you know someone who might be interested in watching this back, it is available on the Woking URC website, wokingurc.org.uk, via our YouTube channel, on our Facebook page. Do feel free to share that or watch it back yourself. Thank you again for coming. Good night.